Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Skinwalker horror stories. First story. I live a bit outside of town, and I like walking in the forest almost daily to clear my mind and just take in nature. Well, obviously I sometimes see animals, and sometimes I come across injured animals, and if I see it necessary, I bring them home and nurse them back to health. A couple of weeks ago on my walk, I heard some squeaking a bit off the trail. I wanted to see what it was, and I found a kitten practically newborn. I wasn't really sure what to do. The mom should be around somewhere, right? I reluctantly kept walking, worried that the mother might not come back if I stuck around. Maybe she was getting food or something. I stayed within earshot, though, because I didn't want the kitten to be snatched up by a predator or freeze to death or something. I waited for about an hour, I think, before I decided that the mother probably abandoned it. I walked over to it, bent down, and started talking in that high-pitched voice everyone does around any kind of baby. Its eyes weren't open yet, but it moved its head towards my voice and tried to crawl towards me. I noticed that it didn't have a tail. I checked for an injury, but it just looked like it was born without it. Maybe that's why the mother left it. I gently picked it up, walked home with it inside of my jacket to keep it warm, got in my car and drove to the vet. I told the vet how I found it, and she started checking her out. She told me that it was a girl and that she seemed healthy, except from a lacking tail, of course, but that shouldn't be a big problem. Her balance might be affected, but since she's born without it, she'll get used to it easily. She asked me if I was planning on keeping her, and I said yes. Obviously, the little fur ball was adorable. The vet helped me with some formula and basic stuff for it, litter box, food bowl, etc. She registered us in the system. I named her Shira. She congratulated me on my new kitten, and I left, happy about having some life in my apartment again. Shira is growing fast, and after just a few days, it started to show that this isn't a normal house cat, but a bobcat. I don't really know what to do. I'm supposed to take her back to the veterinarian soon for vaccines, but I canceled the appointment and said that she didn't survive. Bobcats are obviously wild animals, and it's legal in Norway to take in a wild animal in need of help for a short while before releasing it. But Shira knows nothing about being wild. She wouldn't survive on her own. If I take her back to the vet, she'll be put down, and I've already fallen in love with my little goofball. I'm not planning on keeping her as an inside cat, though. She'll come and go as she pleases, but most likely she'll always need me to make sure that she's well fed and healthy. You probably think I'm crazy for wanting to take care of a bobcat and letting her into my house whenever she wants, but I've had cats before, and there is this special bond of trust when you take care of a cat practically from birth. I know I'm dragging on, and you want to hear about the Skinwalker, and I'm getting there. I just wanted you to know everything from before I started suspecting. A couple of days ago now, she opened her eyes, and seeing her eyes scared the shit out of me. Her eyes are human. Like you can see the white around the pupils. I've had several cats before, never a bobcat of course, but I'm pretty sure the eyes aren't supposed to look like that. It's not just like small cat pupils, it's definitely the eyes of a human. And that was when all the Skinwalker stories I've read and heard came crashing into my mind. The lack of tail and the human eyes are repeated in several stories. Don't ask me how a Skinwalker would end up in Norway though. I thought it was a Native American thing. She's pretty much like any other kitten, though, playful and innocent. She needs me, and I guess I need her too. I don't really have anyone else. I don't care if people don't believe me. In fact, I prefer if you don't. But I need advice, so if you could just pretend to be part of a movie or something, what advice would you give? Is there anything I could do to check to confirm if Shira is a Skinwalker or not? Has anyone ever had a friendly meeting with a Skinwalker? Maybe taking care of an injured animal who turned out to be a Skinwalker? I need someone to talk to about this, but because of legal reasons, I can't talk to anyone here just because she's a bobcat, and I don't want her to get cut open and experimented on if people find out that she's a Skinwalker, if she actually is. So I thought, why not turn to the wonderful Reddit community? The only thank you I can give is to keep you updated on her, how she develops, and whatever I find out. If she doesn't kill me first, of course, tongue sticking out, I don't think she will though. She seems like she trusts me. Second story. Skinwalker birthday camping trip. High no sleep. Long lime lurker / admirer. First time poster. Sorry in advance if this story is disappointing because it isn't very well structured. That's because it's true and happened to us last week. I'm not a very good writer, so please bear with me. Nonetheless, we thought you guys might get a kick out of our experience. Wednesday, June 6th was my boyfriend's birthday. We'd both requested that day off, but hadn't made any actual plans to do anything yet. When I got home from work around 4:30 the day before, he had made a spontaneous decision to go camping. Right now, there's a pretty well-known camping spot called Grayback Gulch only an hour away from us, Boise, Idaho, and though I had never personally been there before, he had been there years before with his parents and grandparents, and it was supposed to be beautiful. It is pretty deep into the woods considering Idaho is primarily a desert, not too far from civilization, and should have been an easy trip. We made a stop at Walmart for last-minute camping supplies, cheap second sleeping bag, dry firewood, food. Don't judge us, it was all very last minute, and took off towards the wilderness. We were in a time crunch because by the time we were packed it was pushing 6 p.m., and we want to make sure we got there before sundown to set up the tent. I sent a text to my mom with the location of the campsite and my boyfriend's license plate number, telling her we would be back sometime the next day. She is an amazing mom, but sometimes gets paranoid, and I didn't want her to panic if she couldn't get hold of us. She would. Unrelated, but kind of funny, the last song we listened to before our radio/cell service cut out was the front bottom song you used, which ends with the vocals trailing off, repeating "I'm about to die" over and over. It ended exactly as we hit the end of cell range, so after that, silence. We laughed about the seemingly ominous warning at the time, and obviously kept going. After a relatively quick drive, we started seeing the signs for Grayback Gulch, and pulled off into the entrance to the Boise National Forest. The path was closed with a big "No trespassing" sign strung across the dirt road. We awkwardly sat for a few minutes, deciding what to do. We were both in the mood to camp, and we were already there, but neither of us knew of any other campgrounds in that area off the top of our heads. We were only a few miles from Idaho City, so we got back on the highway and kept going. Idaho City, for those that haven't been there, is more of a tourist attraction than a city. I've actually never been there while it's open, but it's basically one of those charming little historical sites with saloons and blacksmiths and whatnot set up for people to go see what old-timey life was like. There's also a small motel, a gas station, and a ranger station. So we headed to the ranger station for camping recommendations. A few minutes later, we hit Idaho City, and I shit you not, read it, the ranger station was closed. There was a piece of paper taped to the door explaining that it was their annual ranger field training day, so all rangers were out doing something else, and none of them would be available that day. Great. The only place that was open in Idaho City was a small market with an older woman working. She was nice enough, but clearly not into the whole tourist scene. We inquired about Grayback Gulch, and she informed us that apparently the bridge leading to that campground had collapsed about a year ago. She told us there were two options: pulling off the side of the road somewhere along the forest by mile marker 31, back the way we'd come, or going about 7 miles further to a place called Bad Bear. We asked what she would choose, and she just said, "Oh, I don't camp here." We were both a little sketched out about the idea of just sleeping off the side of the road, so we loaded back into the truck and headed to Bad Bear. Bad Bear was very small, but very pretty. It's not one of those campgrounds with an RV hookup and drinking fountains, pretty much just a dirt patch cleared for a tent. The forest was pretty thick, no hiking trails leading away from the site or anything, just a short path from the highway up to the campground and a nearby narrow stream trickling down the mountain. There were 6 or 7 plots marked for camping. Each one had a picnic table, a fire pit, and a big metal pole with a hook to hang your food away from any bears. As most campgrounds, there was a bulletin board at the entrance reminding campers to pick up their garbage and not leave any fires burning, along with envelopes and a drop box to put in your deposit. It was $15 per night for the single plots and $30 per night for doubles. As we went up to pay the deposit, we noticed that every single other plot there had a sign saying it was reserved, but by this point it was 8 p.m. and no one else had shown up. There was also a porta potty up by the bulletin board, so I told my boyfriend to go ahead and start unpacking, and I'd meet him back there in a few minutes. When leaving the porta potty, I noticed some stairs that didn't seem to head anywhere, just a few feet away. That had seemed to be the makings of what could have been a trail, but after a few feet, the dirt path ends. I'm not sure if they were planning on expanding the campground or building a trail or what, but being the no-sleep fan I am, I snapped a picture in reference to the famous stairs in the Woods Reddit post. I heard my boyfriend calling for me to come quickly. There was something I needed to see, so I rushed back to our site. There in the forest, just a few feet outside of our camp spot, was a definitely man-made little lean-to hovel. It seemed to be made mostly of bark that had been torn from trees. The hovel was pretty small. You probably couldn't fit inside of it unless you were a child, but inside there was a relatively deep, narrow tunnel that went down a few more feet. We figured maybe some kids made the hovel when they were here camping at some point, and after they left, an animal took advantage of it and burrowed into it to make a home. I thought it was really cool, but it sketched my boyfriend out enough that we briefly discussed moving to one of the reserved spots to be further away from it. We didn't want to risk getting in trouble, so we shrugged it off and finished setting up the camp. I took a picture of the hovel to later show my father, a BLM forestry and fire service employee. We pitched the tent, he chopped wood and built the fire, and we settled in to roast some hot dogs and marshmallows. Now, it's a good time to mention that I have an eye disease called lattice degeneration. It means I have shitty eyesight to the point where over my life I've squinted so hard the muscles wore thin and tore. That's not actually how it works at all, but it's the easiest way to explain it. So far I've had 2 surgeries for it, which repaired the tears, but also made it so my pupils don't dilate anymore. This is only relevant because it's important to know that when it's too bright, or more commonly, too dark, I can't see at all. Debilitating night blindness. Huge pain in the ass. After sitting around the fire for maybe 45 minutes, the sun was falling behind the trees, and I realized exactly how dark it was going to get out there in the middle of nowhere. I nudged my boyfriend and told him that we probably had about 15 minutes before I go almost completely blind. Flashlights help, but not very much because my eyes suck at high contrast lighting situations like that. So we both realized I'd be depending on them a lot if I needed to get up to go to the bathroom or anything. We sat and talked and ate for a while longer. I'm not sure how much time had passed, but I know it must have been about 11 p.m. now. We were getting to the point where neither of us were really tired, but it was now completely blackout, and we should probably turn in soon. The fire was slowly starting to die down. I looked at him sitting next to me and realized he was staring intently into the woods in the direction of our tent. I tried to follow his line of sight, but couldn't see anything past 2 feet in front of me. I pulled on his arm, asking what he saw. Without breaking his stare, and in classic horror movie fashion, he calmly said, "Nothing, there's nothing," but kept staring. It was at this moment we both noticed how silent it was. There were no bugs, no crickets, no owls or frogs, just the quiet babbling of the stream nearby and deafening silence behind it. I pulled on his arm again. "Seriously, what do you see?" It was then I noticed that he wasn't staring at our tent. He was looking right past it, to the hovel. This time he stayed quiet. He is an experienced shooter and had his gun on his hip in case of bears, but sitting there in the blackness, I felt like a sitting duck, getting more nervous by the second. I kept nervously looking in the direction he was trying to see, anything to no avail. He stood up and tried to brush it off. "It's just so quiet," he said. "I really don't like that hovel." I thought I heard something moving. For some reason, this calmed me down a little. The idea of a raccoon or deer being nearby was comforting compared to the absolute silence. I told him that whatever lived in the hovel was probably just returning home for the night. I meant it to be sweet, but I don't think he saw it that way. I tried starting up another conversation about something else, but after a few minutes, he was staring intently again, scowling. Finally, in a quiet voice, he asked, "Would you be mad if we left?" "Left? Like pack up and drive home?" "Yep." "Now?" "Yep." At this point, my heart was racing. I had no idea what he saw or thought he saw in the woods. And if anything happened and he took his gun and went to check it out, I would be sitting on a stump in the open, completely blind. I told him right now, I can't see. I need you to see for me. That means I'm completely in your hands right now. If you think there's something out there, I have to believe you because I don't know. So if you think we need to leave, we should leave. He handed me a flashlight and grabbed my hand, slowly leading me over the rocky terrain. We gathered up our food garbage, snuffed out the fire, and started packing. We were trying to hurry, but with me not being able to see and him not being willing to look away from the woods, it was a slow process. When it came time to start taking out the tent poles and breaking them down, I could barely reach the top to untie them from the tent, so he had to do it. I held the flashlight for him, and he quickly demanded, shine the light that way. I pointed the light towards the hovel, and we broke down the tent in the dark. We were only a stone's throw from the truck, just on the other side of some bushes, so we made several short trips. We didn't bother putting the tent or sleeping bags away properly, just throwing them into the bed of the truck. The truck was probably only about 20 feet from the road, with just a line of trees for privacy blocking the highway from the campground. It was on one of these trips back and forth while loading the truck, he heard it, a man's voice coming from the road. We were definitely close enough that we would have heard a car and seen headlights, so we knew that no one had driven up. It went on for several seconds. It sounded deep, but definitely human, although it sounded like gibberish. He described it as if someone was on the phone, just one voice, speaking, waiting for a response, and then speaking again. We, of course, knew for a fact that even if someone had somehow snuck to the campground without us noticing, there was certainly no cell reception. We went into borderline panic mode, making one last dash to grab the last of the important things and bolting to the truck, probably leaving some last scraps of food and garbage behind, sorry Earth. We threw everything into the bed of the truck and sped off to the freeway towards home. We drove in silence for several minutes. I get nervous when we drive at night because I can't see the road at all, so it's hard to fully trust anyone driving when you yourself can't keep an eye out for animals crossing or potholes or whatever. We had the brights on, but it was still so impossibly dark and quiet as we were driving through the forest. I snapped one last picture and we drove straight home. Eventually, on the hour-long drive, we calmed down a little bit. He apologized for making us leave, but said he just had such a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach long before he ever heard the voice. I told him not to apologize, that I was glad to follow his gut on this one. I jokingly told him that based on everything we experienced, if I actually believed in that stuff, I'd say we encountered a skinwalker. His face fell, and he got very quiet, so I kept talking. I told him how in creepypasta, skinwalkers live in the wilderness and mimic the voices and conversations they hear, usually to lure people away from the group so they can eat them or whatever. After a couple minutes, he confessed, that makes sense, because it sounded just like my grandfather. He told me again how he'd been up camping in this general area before when he was a kid with his parents and grandparents. He even remembers staying at Bad Bear once, but his father had horrible nightmares all night, so they never went back. Anyway, that's my story. Sorry it went on for so long. I didn't want to leave out any details. As I mentioned, I took several pictures throughout the day, including one of the hovel, so here they are for your amusement. Third story. My experience with a skinwalker in the Pecos Wilderness, New Mexico. A skinwalker is a person with the ability to transform into any different type of animal at will. They're most frequently seen as coyotes, wolves, foxes, eagles, owls, or crows. Some can also steal the faces of different people and could appear as someone you know. If you accidentally lock eyes with a skinwalker, they can absorb themselves into your body and take control of your actions. Rare skinwalkers can also have the ability to enchant the powder of corpses and use the substance as a poison dust on victims. The legend of the skinwalkers originates from the Navajo, a southwestern Native American tribe. In July of 2016, I went with 3 of my roommates on a camping trip in New Mexico. We decided to hike into the Pecos wilderness because of the beautiful pictures of the lakes and trails on the preserve. I don't know if camping on the preserve is actually allowed, but we were carefree and didn't check to see if we could. We hiked until we reached one of the lakes. By that time it was dusk, and we were starving and tired. We decided to set up our tents about a 2/4 of a mile from the lake. We brought hot dogs and beans to cook on a fire, classic camping cuisine. We split up to get stuff for the fire, dead branches, twigs, and stones. While getting firewood, I noticed a lot of coyote scat in the area. I made a mental note to keep my pocket knife close, even though coyotes aren't a huge threat. When I came back, I told my friends, but like me, they didn't think much of it. We cooked our hot dogs and beans and passed around a bottle of whiskey. This may sound irresponsible, but one bottle of whiskey split 4 ways isn't that much. After dinner, we sat talking about things that went on that year. Overwatch, the election, Brexit, Zika virus, etc. So it became pitch black, the only light coming from the fire and a couple of electric lanterns we brought. My roommates went to bed one by one until, like in normal horror story fashion, I was alone. I sat stoking the fire, making sure it was a controlled burn before I could go brush my teeth and change into sleeping clothes. I walked 2/4 of a mile back to the lake with one of the lanterns and used the lake water to brush my teeth and wash my face. While washing my face, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got the feeling of being watched. I'm crouching at the edge of the lake, realizing how vulnerable I am. Only a pocket knife to defend myself. I could be a deranged camper out here. I stand up, hand in my pocket, on my knife, when I hear coyotes howling. I relax, thinking that it may be just been the coyotes watching me, so I walk back to the campsite. I make it back and go into my tent to get sleeping clothes out of my backpack. I'm about to take off my shirt and start changing when I hear twigs break. I just thought one of my roommates came back out of their tent to go take a leak. I stuck my head out of my tent when I saw a coyote near the campfire. I freeze, trying to take in what's happening. It looked like a coyote, except for a few characteristics. Its eyes were a really bright yellow. It looked taller than a normal coyote would be, and it was crouching near the fire, crouching on its hind legs. I'm frozen, being stared down by the coyote when one of my roommates tries to get out of his tent. He sticks a foot and a head out before he sees it. He stares and yells, "What the actual foo?" K. The coyote runs at breakneck speed into the darkness, but not normally on its hind legs. My roommate continues to yell and wakes up the others. They ask what happened, and we explain to them what we saw. They thought we were bull ting them and didn't believe a word we said. Me and the roommate decided to sleep in the same tent since I was the only who brought a knife along. We laid there, cramped in the tent, too terrified to sleep when we heard noises. Twigs snapping around our campsite, as if it was circling the campsite. We stayed motionless in the tent, not daring to see the time go by on our phones. Eventually daylight came, and the noises grew further away. Our 2 roommates didn't hear the noises and had to force us out of the tent in order to leave. We walked miles back to where we parked our car and decided we should get a hotel room and spend the night in Santa Fe. When we get into our room, I immediately Google the events of what happened the previous night and learn of the Navajo legend. When you go camping, make sure you have something to protect yourself and a way to get out of there in an instant. 4th story. I think I met a skinwalker. Growing up in Arizona, I can say I was raised in a melting pot. Yeah, I know, pun intended. It's hot out here, but honestly, I met a lot of cool kids, including some of the Navajo children. They weren't any different than me. They just have separate cultural norms in my family. During class earlier this week, one of my friends joked around about something called a skinwalker. Immediately, the Navajo children shot a pissed and worrisome look to him. I decided to confront him. "Hey dude, it looks like you really upset them." "So what? It's not my fault they're afraid of skinwalkers," he yelped, putting special volume and enunciation on the last words. As silly as it is, I didn't even know what that was. So I asked him, and he responded, but I love to piss those kids off." Later in gym class, I walked to the bleachers from the track to the kids. "Hey fellas, I'm sorry for my friend. He could be a real jerk sometimes. They told me not to worry about it. You know, guys, you don't have to, but can you guys tell me what a skinwalker is? I've never even heard of it till this day. One of the kids started looking around cautiously, and I felt like he was about to tell me. But he hesitated as a grasshopper bounced off his foot. You know, I think you're better off not knowing. And even more better off not saying their name. Feeling defeated, I walked home to my family's ranch. I noticed as I was about on the porch, there was a couple coyotes nearby. They've always been a big problem in this area. They've bothered my family's livestock, and a donkey can only kill so many. Normally I could scare them off by tossing a rock or something. But when I did, they remained still. I walked inside and told my dad about the coyotes, and he loaded up his shotgun. Dad wasn't much a hunter, but he had no sympathy for invasive coyotes and rattlesnakes. He kept a single-shot 12-gauge by the door in the event one of the two made their way on the property. Dad walked out and peppered the ground near one. All of them scattered but one. He got into a stare down with my dad and wasn't bucking under the threat of being pumped full of shell. I saw Dad pop in another shell, and he fired again, striking the coyote and laying it down. He hollered at me that he was going to drag the body off the property and would be back shortly. That evening he came in limping, not like in a pain limp, but in an awkward one that seemed unlike anything I'd seen before. Dad, what happened? Did you twist an ankle? No, son. Fell carrying carcass. Be okay. Great. He had been drinking again. I bet that's took him so long. Probably hit the bottle in the barn once he hauled the coyote away. Lord knows this wasn't the first time that's happened. I figured while he was drunk, I could ask him about skinwalkers. Dad was pretty superstitious, which makes sense why he wouldn't try to scare me with ghost stories. Dad, someone at school said something about skinwalkers, and I've never heard of such a thing. Do you know anything about that? He instantly sobered up. Well, listen here, boy. Skinwalkers are magnificent witches who can transform themselves into animals. Most of the kids at your school wouldn't dare speak of them because they fear them. But that's all fake, right? Dad chuckled. No, you never know when one is near. Could be any animal. Some of the ones could be insects, people. They're masters of disguise. He stood up and hobbled out the door. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong, and mind who your company is. He then walked back out the barn. Later that night, he walked in and took his boots off. Hey, Dad, I'm sorry for bringing up skinwalkers. I know you've worked hard all day and don't have time to answer questions. Son, what are you talking about? Did you fall asleep? I hauled the coyote off and loaded on the trailer to take for a proper burial. I just pulled in. Fifth story. You know the legends about skinwalkers, right? This past October, I had worked at a haunt, that is a haunted attraction at a local theme park. I was pretty good at managing the big crowds, but what I really enjoyed was when the crowds would get smaller and groups of 10 to 20 people were coming into my attraction. During times when the crowds were thin like that, I loved scaring them with stories and legends I knew about, and one of my favorite legends to tell them were the Skinwalker legends. I would start off greeting the group and tempting them with the offer to tell them all a story, asking them if they would like to hear a local legend, as we live in the desert. And this haunt was tucked away in the heart of miles of desert land. When they would agree, I would start my tale. Some of you may know about skinwalkers, and for those of you that do, you might know that native Navajo and Hopi tribes are fearful to even speak of this creature, or to even utter its name. These monsters span from southern Arizona, all through to New Mexico and the Mexican border, and across the lands of the native peoples. The Navajo believe them to be witches or shaman, an evil being with the supernatural power to shapeshift, typically by wearing the skins or masks of the animal they wish to walk, as a practice which is looked down upon by the Navajo people. This power is gained after killing a close relative or sibling, and imbues the being with many dark powers. The animal they appear as, however, always looks wrong. A deer or coyote that stands on its hind legs and walks as a man does. A crow or owl, or has a face or eyes that look too human to belong to the animal they mimic, and that glow red in the moonlight. In all the legends, it says there is always one sure way to identify a skinwalker. A skinwalker, no matter what, will never be able to move as the creature it appears as in its animal form. Skinwalkers are able to do other things as well. They can move at seemingly impossible speeds and can mimic the voice of people, crying babies, your friends, or loved ones, voices you would trust. They will lure you out into the forests or into the pitch black of the nighttime desert. And once they have you isolated and you lay your eyes upon their face, it is said you will die an agonizing death. Skinwalkers can curse people and cause them great suffering. Often, it is said they use a mixture that some call corpse powder when seen in their human form, which turns your tongue black and causes violent convulsions until you die. The worst part about skinwalkers, the reason native people dare not speak of it, is believed that a skinwalker is capable of reading your minds, and the more aware of them you are, the more aware they become of you. So try not to think about it. But if on your ride home you see a coyote in your path, or hear the drums of native people echoing loudly through the darkness, take care to drive quickly, and pray will not pursue you. And I would, almost always, be met with looks of horror and fear. It was my absolute favorite tale to tell for this reason. I would tell this story over and over to as many groups as I could. It wasn't a good idea to talk about them. I would say as much with each recounting of the legend, and much less in the middle of the desert, surrounded by inky blackness that engulfed everything the park's lights didn't illuminate. But I did. I felt safe. Nothing would happen to me. It was just a legend. That was until I drove home after my shift, around 1 in the morning, after a night of telling this particular story dozens of times to guests. As I drove through the twists and turns of the pitch-black mountainous desert road, I traveled each night to go home, my high beams on, penetrating the darkness just enough for me to see the road and the first layer of brush on either side of it. My headlights shone on an animal, a coyote. At first I thought it was just the angle the lights had hit it that made it appear to have no tail, but as I continued driving, I encountered the animal again, 3 times, each within several miles of each sighting, a distance any normal animal wouldn't have been able to make, especially when running against a car going 65 miles per hour for most of the journey. Each time I would scan the road for wildlife, and I would see it there just outside of the darkness, the coyote with no tail, staring at me from the side of the road. My stomach churned a bit, and I breathed deep, trying to tell myself I was just imagining things. The coyotes had tails, and none of them were the same animal. It wasn't possible. I couldn't be. But I knew deep down I was lying to myself. I knew I was wrong. I knew it was real, and it was terrifying. I'm relieved to say I made it home safely that night. But still, every now and then, when I drive through the desert in the darkness of night, or glance out my bedroom window into the blackness, I can see that coyote, that skinwalker. I hope it never decides I know too much, but I think that maybe, just maybe, it visits me to remind me of its presence. That it wants me to continue telling this story, to continue spreading awareness of their presence, so that it can claim the lives of those who are weak-minded enough to fall prey to it. And now that you know the story, maybe it will come after you. 6th story. The myth of the skinwalker is based on something worse. The sun is a relentless overlord. Its fiery gaze scorches the earth beneath my boots as I lead my team through the jagged maw of the canyon. Every step I take is an act of defiance against the unforgiving terrain of the American Southwest. The canyons around us are like the ribs of some ancient, slumbering beast, and we, mere mortals, dare to tread upon its bones. Keep close, I call out, my voice barely carrying over the sound of our synchronized footsteps that reverberate against the oppressive walls. The echo serves as a haunting reminder that in this place, nature does not yield, it dominates. My fingers brush against the worn leather of my satchel. It's heavy with the tools of our trade, but it's my resolve that truly weighs on me. As we venture deeper, the silence is absolute, save for the occasional clatter of a loose stone kicked down the path by one of us. Each echo feels like a taunt, as if the canyon itself is mocking our pursuit of knowledge, our hunger to unearth secrets long buried within its sinewy depths. I squint against the glare of the sun, which seems to aim its blistering rays with malicious intent. Even the air we breathe is tinged with the taste of dust and desolation. A stark reminder of how inhospitable this ancient land is to those who dare to unveil its mysteries. The heat wraps around us like a shroud, suffocating and unyielding. Our journey today is driven by whispers of the past, tales of petroglyphs etched into the canyon's flesh, holding truths untold. With each step, the anticipation builds within me, a gnawing curiosity that has become my constant companion. It's that very curiosity that has led me here, where the lines between academic pursuit and obsession blur. The landscape is a canvas of desolation, painted with hues of red and orange that bleed into one another under the harsh gaze of the sun. In the distance, the outline of the canyon walls rise up like the jagged teeth of some primordial creature, ready to snap shut at any moment. And yet, amidst the stark brutality of this place, there is a beauty, an undeniable rawness, that fuels my passion. "Sam, watch your step," comes a cautious voice from behind me, reminding me that even in my fervor, I am not alone. We are a team, bound together by a shared thirst for discovery and the thrill of the unknown. Our destination lies ahead, veiled in shadow and silence, beckoning us to uncover what lies beyond the realm of the living. The sun may be merciless, the silence overwhelming, but my heart races with the promise of discovery. For within these ancient walls lie stories waiting to be told, horrors to be faced, and truths to be revealed. And I, Dr. Sam Jameson, will stop at nothing to bring them into the light. "Pass me the brush, will you?" I called out, my voice a stark contrast to the sibilant whispers of sand skittering across rock. My fingers itched for the tool as I hovered over a promising fissure that cleaved through the earth at my feet. "Here," grunted Mark, the team's geologist, his hand extending a worn brush with bristles frayed from use. His skeptical, I never failed to question my hunches, yet here he was, indulging my instincts. Our relationship was a dance of respect and rivalry, each step measured, each turn sharp with silent challenges. "Thanks," I muttered, focusing on the task. The excavation was delicate work. Every stroke had to be precise, like a surgeon wielding a scalpel. The others watched, a circle of guardians against the encroaching dread of the canyons. "Think we'll find anything, Sam?" asked Jenna, her tone light, but her eyes betraying a glimmer of the same hunger that drove us all. She was the youngest of us, eager and bright, her presence a balm to the raw edges of our group's dynamics. "Something calls to us from these stones," I replied, more to myself than to her. "I can feel it." The sun bore down, an unyielding overseer, as we worked in tense silence. Time slipped by unnoticed, measured only by the shadows that began their slow crawl across the canyon floor. And then my brush caught on something, a line, no, several lines etched into the rock. With each careful sweep, a form emerged, grooves deepened by ancient hands revealing a petroglyph so old it seemed to pulse with the weight of eons. "Look at this," I breathed, my heart pounding with triumph. The image sprawled before us was both mesmerizing and malevolent. A creature with limbs too many to count, a body twisted in shapes unnatural, its eyes hollow pits that seemed to stare back from the abyss of time. "Impossible." Mark's voice trailed off, his usual skepticism swallowed by the sight. The depiction was a grotesque mockery of life. Limbs contorted, fangs bared in a silent snarl, claws that suggested not just predation, but an intelligence behind the hunt. "Sam, what is that?" Jenna's voice quivered, the notes of excitement now edged with fear. "Shoo!" I hushed her, my gaze locked onto the carving. Was it my imagination, or did the air around us grow colder? "An omen," Mark ventured, his face unreadable. "Or a warning?" "Neither," I said, the scientist within me refusing superstition. It's a piece of history, a chapter of a story long forgotten. But even as I spoke, the unsettling sense of being watched crept over me, a prickle on the skin that defied reason. We stood together, a fellowship circled around an ancient horror, bound by the thrill of discovery and a dawning realization that some secrets might have been meant to stay buried in the unforgiving embrace of the canyons. The silence was almost suffocating as we stood encircled by the ancient stone gallery, the weight of 1,000 sun-baked days pressing down upon our shoulders. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, my mind refusing to untangle the disturbing collage of images chiseled into the canyon walls. "Looks like the local boogeyman," Dan joked, breaking the spell as he traced a finger along the jagged outline of the creature. "Or a bedtime story to keep the kids from wandering off," Jenna chimed in, her earlier fears subsiding as she embraced the comforting blanket of logic. "Exactly," I replied, forcing a smile. Yet the petroglyphs beckoned, whispering secrets I was determined to decipher. Tribal tales often have roots in some sort of truth. They're cautionary, meant to teach or warn. Warn about what, Dr. Jameson? Mark raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with skepticism. "There's no such thing as monsters. Just nature, red in tooth and claw. Nature doesn't usually carve its nightmares into rock walls." I countered quietly, my eyes scanning the grotesque figure, each curve and line inciting a hunger for understanding that overshadowed my trepidation. "Yet here we stand, debating mythology in the middle of nowhere," Dan said with a dismissive wave. "Let's document it and move on. We've got real history to uncover." "Right," Jenna agreed, but her glance at me held a flicker of doubt, a shared curiosity she wouldn't voice. But the petroglyphs had etched themselves into my very soul, a mold spreading through my thoughts, dark and relentless. The air grew thick with the scent of secrets and decay, the oppressive heat of the canyons warping reality around us. "Sam," Mark's concern broke through my reverie. "You okay?" "Fine," I lied, my pulse racing with the thrill of the unknown. "Just thinking. Thinking can be dangerous out here," he warned, his gaze scanning the desolate landscape as if it too hid unspeakable truths. "Sometimes danger is necessary to unearth the past." I muttered more to myself than to him, my resolve hardening like the rocks that cradled the cryptic chronicle of an ancient terror. Something stirred within me, a primal fear mingled with a scientist's zeal. I needed to know, to understand what the petroglyphs truly represented. "Let's set up camp," I announced, tearing my gaze away from the haunting image. "Tomorrow, we delve deeper. Into the canyon or the legend?" Dan asked, half mocking, half curious. "Both," I whispered, the word hanging in the air, a portent of horrors yet to come. The morning sun had not yet clawed its way above the canyon rims when I set out, leaving the others shrouded in the hush of pre-dawn slumber. My boots crunched on the gravel-strewn path, a staccato accompaniment to the thrumming of my heart. The canyon seemed to swallow me whole, their towering walls a silent testament to eons of secrets. "Sam, wait up!" Jenna's voice echoed behind me, her presence an unwanted reminder of the world beyond these ancient stones. "Didn't want to wake the team," I said without looking back, my eyes scanning the rocky expanse for another glimpse of those cryptic symbols that had haunted my dreams. "Like hell," she retorted, catching up with brisk strides that matched my own urgency. "You're obsessed." "Curious," I corrected her sharply, pausing as a new cluster of petroglyphs emerged from the shadows, their forms undulating across the stone surface like malignant growths. "Jesus, Sam." Jenna's breath hitched, and I knew she saw it too. The grotesque tableau etched into the rock, more vivid and visceral than any we'd encountered before. This array was a nightmarish sequence, figures twisted and elongated, human limbs merging with bestial features. A hunter, his arm morphing into the scaly limb of a reptile. A woman, her face splitting to reveal the fanged maw of a predator. Each carving was more harrowing than the last, a parade of mutations that defied the natural order. Look at their expressions, I whispered, stepping closer, the smell of dust and antiquity filling my lungs. Fear, agony, transformation, or just crude artistry, Jenna countered, though her voice wavered, betraying her skepticism. Artistry doesn't make your skin crawl, I said, tracing a finger over a depiction so vile, a creature caught mid-shift, half man, half thing, that my stomach churned in revolt. This is a warning. Warning or not, you're playing with fire here, Sam. Jenna's hand grasped my shoulder, pulling me away from the hypnotic horror. Let's get back to the others. Wait. My eyes caught on a symbol beneath the carvings, a singular glyph that felt familiar, though I couldn't place it. It beckoned me, whispering promises of revelation, of knowledge hidden within its curves and lines. Sam, I shook off Jenna's grip, heat rising in my chest. No, there's something here, something we're meant to find, or something meant to stay buried. Jenna shot back, but I could tell she wouldn't leave me alone in this desolate place. Then help me uncover it, I said, addressing her unspoken fear. If we don't understand what happened here, who will? Jenna sighed, a sound lost amidst the rising wind that carried with it a taste of ancient dread. Together, we stepped deeper into the canyon's embrace, where the sun dared not tread, and the echoes of a shape-shifting terror lingered, waiting to be awakened. The canyon shadow swallowed us whole as we inched forward, the team's breaths a chorus of unsettled whispers behind me. The oppressive silence was a living thing, an observer that watched with unseen eyes. Did you see that? Mark's voice cracked the stillness, his flashlight beam darting to a crevice where darkness pooled thicker than blood. See what? I asked, my pulse quickening, my own light joining his in a futile search for clarity. Nothing. It's nothing. But the tremor in his denial spoke volumes. The petroglyphs seemed to throb with a malevolent life as we passed, their grotesque figures casting elongated shadows that danced and twisted on the rock face. Each step felt like a descent into the bowels of some ancient beast, the air growing thick, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decay. Guys, this isn't right, Lisa murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. We're rational people. We shouldn't let these carvings get to us. Then why do I feel like we're being hunted? Jenna's normally steady hand gripped mine, her knuckles white with fear. Her question hung between us, unanswered. A sudden gust of wind snarled through the canyon, carrying with it a sound that froze my blood, a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from every direction. Instinctively, we huddled closer, the familiar light of day, now just a distant memory, replaced by the creeping terror that slithered along our spines. Animals. I tried to convince myself as much as them, but the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. Animals don't make sounds like that, Mark countered, his eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting them to coalesce into the very creature the petroglyph depicted. Let's keep moving, I urged, hoping motion would quell the mounting dread. We need to find. Find what, Sam? Our own graves. Lisa's sarcasm cut deeper because we all felt it, the insidious doubt seeping into our resolve. Look, Jenna pointed to a nearby ledge where a fresh set of petroglyphs revealed themselves, untouched by time. The depiction was clear, a humanoid figure, its body a patchwork of animal parts, eyes hollow pits that seemed to stare back at us with hunger. Mutations, I whispered, my throat dry. Or transformations? Does it matter? Mark's question was rhetorical, his gaze locked on the haunting image. Either way, it feels like a warning. Warnings are meant to be heeded, Lisa added, her usual skepticism dissolving into the air, as thick and real as the moldy scent that clung to the rocks around us. Something is here with us. Jenna's voice broke, a mix of realization and terror, something that doesn't want us here. Then let's not overstay our welcome, I said, though my legs refused to carry me away from the grotesque artistry before us. As we attempted to retreat, a chorus of whispers rose from the canyon depths, words undecipherable yet laden with intent. Did you hear that? Lisa gasped, her flashlight flickering erratically as if in response to the sinister murmurs. Enough, Mark shouted, his composure cracking. "This is madness." "Madness or not," I replied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We've awakened something ancient, and I fear there's no putting it back to sleep." The sun had long since vanished, swallowed by the jagged teeth of the canyon walls, and with it, the illusion of safety dissipated into the creeping twilight. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as we navigated the treacherous terrain, the beam of my flashlight a feeble sentinel against the encroaching darkness. "Sam, wait up!" Jenna's voice trembled from somewhere behind me. I turned, the light slicing through the shadows, only to find empty space where she should have been. "Jenna!" The word echoed off the stone, returning to me twisted and distorted. Panic clawed at my chest. "Mark, Lisa, did you see where—" But my question died on my lips. The spot where Mark had just been surveying the area was now void. No sign of struggle, no cry for help. He'd simply vanished into the abyss that this place had become. "Lisa," I called out, desperate for the comfort of another human voice. "Here," she replied, but her voice was quivering, a thin thread of sound barely reaching me. "We need to stick together." "Agreed," I managed to say, though my throat felt like it was closing in on itself. We huddled close, our flashlights casting eerie, dancing shadows that seemed to mock our plight. "Something's hunting us," Lisa whispered, her words laced with a terror that mirrored my own. "Taking us," I corrected grimly. "One by one, like prey." We moved cautiously, the oppressive silence of the canyon weighing heavily upon us. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating, alive with a malevolent presence we could feel but not see. Each step became a silent prayer, not to be the next to disappear into the merciless grasp of the unseen predator. Then it happened. A soft scuff of sand alerted us, and we whirled around, our lights converging on a figure emerging from the dark. But it wasn't Jenna or Mark. It was something else, something grotesque and utterly terrifying. The creature before us was a chimera of flesh and nightmare, its body a sickening tapestry of human and animal parts stitched together by some unholy will. "God!" Lisa's voice was little more than a horrified whisper. "Run!" I screamed, the word ripping from my lungs as the creature took a loping step toward us. Our feet pounded against the earth, a desperate rhythm as we fled. I dared a glance over my shoulder, witnessing the horror as it shifted again, its form blurring into something even more monstrous, part man, part beast, all terror. The unspeakable sight seared itself into my mind, a vision of pure dread that promised nightmares for whatever days I had left. "Keep moving," I urged Lisa, who needed no convincing. We ran blindly, knowing that survival meant distance from that which sought to add us to its grotesque composition. As we escaped into the relative safety of the moonlit expanse beyond the canyon's grip, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. The horrors of the past were very much alive, and we had stirred them from their ancient slumber. Seventh story, Smiling Skinwalker. I've had a draft of this story set up for a while, but I've been too worried and scared to tell. It made me question everything. My faith, my eyes, my sanity. I've decided it's time to finally let others know about what I've experienced, as it may help me move on. At least that's what I hope. I recently moved westward to Arizona from the boring state of Oklahoma. I am a devout Christian, and never once before this had I believed there were entities in existence that we couldn't hunt down with our modern advancements. It's 2019, for heaven's sake. You'd figure if we wanted to find something, we would, and most of all, we could. It was the 23rd of December, 2018. I was in Payson, Arizona, a bit north of Phoenix. My friends and I, in our Christmas spirit, decided to head out north of town about 5 to 6 miles or so into the forest on a secluded trail. It was cold that night. Some of my friends shivered and displayed obvious signs of unpreparedness. I was layered fairly well, and yet the winds and frigid cold punctured through my layers and onto me. We wanted to make a bonfire, warm up, enjoy ourselves and a few drinks. I knew as soon as I got into the car to head that way, something was off. I felt sick, uneasy, and something in my gut told me to just stay home. But I couldn't put my finger on just what, and ignore my ever so looming feelings of anxiety. We picked up friends and headed to the trail. I'm a huge nature lover and always felt safe in the confines of the forest. I felt in control, at ease. But not tonight. It may sound cliche, but I'll be damned if it didn't feel like someone or something was watching me when we finally got there. And when I had gotten far enough down the trail that turning back would be no hasty endeavor, it finally hit me why I felt so eerie. That same year, during the weeks prior to Thanksgiving, I was here before. It's not a spot we usually go to. Therefore, I was not familiar with it, nor my friends. We were coming out for the same reason we were in December, for a few drinks around a bonfire. It was late. I, however, hadn't had any spirits that night. It was my job to gather firewood. I didn't mind. My chance to survey and explore the area around us wouldn't be bad. Before I even left our area, things took a turn for the strange. I was at the edge of the light being cast from the small bonfire I was to gather more fuel for. In the faint glow of the far trees, I caught a glimpse of something dark behind tall pine. I asked backwards to my friends if it was out of the ordinary for people to be hanging around this spot. My query was only met with silence from them as they drank on. I took a few more steps beyond the comfort of the blaze, keeping my eyes affixed on the tall, shadowy figure fixated behind the tall trees. I could faintly make out that it had moved in a slight, bobbing motion, like a buoy upon a tide. My immediate thoughts drew a blank as to why someone would be out here doing this. Maybe I was seeing things, or it was a prank of some sort. I opened my mouth to call out, or even crack a joke, but was mortified when I realized I could not speak. Something inside of me prevented me of making any noise. My heart raced. As it swiftly came, it shot off into the distance like a bullet. Being startled so badly, I fell back on the ground and kicked myself back like a spooked animal, scratching and cutting my hands as I do so. My friends saw me and laughed, thinking I was drunk. I managed to stammer out a line to what I saw, but was only met with a few blank stares and laughs, making me sound stupid. For the rest of the night, I never dared step away from the beams of the bonfire. As I walked down that trail that frigid December evening, I remember what I had seen and felt on that cold November night, and my stomach dropped. My friends were slurring out Christmas carols and other drunk epiphanies. I know they wouldn't listen to me even if I spoke out, so I ignored the guttural feelings, prayed for the best, and walked on. I hadn't been drinking much this night either. I don't enjoy alcohol as much as my friends, and often I was the one responsible for herding them home when the night was over. However, to calm my tense nerves, I had a drink or two from some Jaeger we had chilled in the ice chest. It was Christmas after all. It worked. We were all having a good time, enjoying our festive feelings and generally savoring the crisp forest atmosphere. Soon, nature called, and forgetting my prior ordeal, I began to walk away from the fire to relieve myself. I walked a fair 300 or so feet away towards a big rock resting behind some fallen trees, not wanting to be seen doing my business. I was not even far enough away from the fire to not be able to hear my friends' voices echoing through the woodlands. From behind me, my friend Corbin, who had come along, called out my name. I'll admit, I was tipsy, but nowhere near enough to not differentiate reality from a drunken stupor. I remember calling out to him, telling him to give me a moment to finish. I zipped up and turned to walk around the rock to where I heard him wonder to. I don't know what it was, but sure as all heaven above and hell below was not Corbin. It took me a minute for my woozy mind to put this together and stop walking towards it. I am thankful I did. This being stood tall, at least 6 to 7 feet. Its eyes burned like our fire. It moved from a dog-like 4-limb position to standing tall. The light from the moon on this cold night radiated the body, showing off its dark, slender shape with an inhumane sheen. I began to sob, violently. My mind ran in panic circles. Seconds felt like lifetimes as my world ground to a halt at the clawed feet of the beast that I was sure was going to take my life from me right then and there. I did the only thing I could think to do. I dropped to my knees and began to pray. This monster, to my petrified brain, had to have been the devil himself. To imagine him anything worse than it would be impossible. It did not like my pleas to God. An unholy shriek of what I can only think to describe as someone screaming loudly with lungs full of water rang out. I screamed in terror and with all the strength I could muster, lunged backwards across the forest floor, running as fast as my legs could take me. I fell a few times, I think in sheer panic. I just couldn't manage to get my body to work properly knowing that thing was near. When I returned in a panic craze to the fire, covered in sweat, dirt, and tears, I managed to wheeze out what happened somewhat through my sobs of fear. I could tell they doubted whether or not what I was desperately stammering out was real or not. I think I was so horrified in that moment that I had a small seizure, because everything else is a blur. I remember going to the truck, leaving. I remember waking up the next day, receiving a multitude of texts saying I was either stupid and crazy or texts from worried friends asking if I was okay. And I also remember the last I saw of the thing before I made my frenzied flee, when it smiled back at me through the forest and skittered off into the darkness. A few days after Christmas, I was able to get in touch with a native elder here in town. I was so scared mentioning the event because I was worried of being mocked or him not believing me. To a twist of my thinking, I told him very vividly what I had encountered. He wholeheartedly believed and told me it was a skinwalker. He then blessed me thoroughly and told me to leave that stretch of land alone and to never venture out there again. Next time I might not be so lucky. He didn't have to tell me twice. I know I sound crazy. If I were you, I wouldn't believe me either. But you don't have to. All you have to know is for the love of God above and all things holy, never forget that we are not alone on this earth. Sometimes during the night, whenever I look out my window, I catch sight of eyes in the trees looking back at me. I will keep this thread updated. I'm still horrified. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.